Kellen Moore's approach to offense should allow the New Orleans Saints in 2025 to finally achieve that offensive revival they were looking for in 2024. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, New Orleans Saints have a new tight ends coach that might help them get a foot in the door on some big-time potential free agents at the position. I'll tell you why defensive coordinator is the single most important hire Kellen Moore will make this offseason, and we'll lead everything off today with Kellen Moore's unique approach to offense and why it should allow the New Orleans Saints to finally capture that offensive revival they were so desperately chasing in 2024. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. Head over to FanDuel.com today to get started. Kellen Moore was very clear in his introductory press conference on Thursday about how he plans to approach the offensive side of the football with some modern takes, modern elements, and modern ideas that should allow the New Orleans Saints to finally capture that offensive revival they were chasing in 2024. I'm going to remind you and play a clip for you here in just a sec of something that Kellen Moore said that he wants to implement into the New Orleans Saints offense, and then we'll break down the numbers of how this happens and what we saw Kellen Moore do in Philadelphia, how it translates over to the New Orleans Saints. Here's what Kellen Moore had to say about an approach to the game that includes modern ideas in today's NFL.
This thing from an offensive perspective is you got to stress the defense, whether it be tempo, which we'll use a lot of. We like to use a lot of tempo every place that I've been. We'll use shifts and motions when we huddle, but we want to stress the defense. Now, whether we have to throw it 50 times or run it 15 times, I really don't care. However, we got to win a football game. We'll do that based off who we have available to us and who's on our roster. But we want to be a team that stresses the defense, challenges them, utilizes our entire roster, the depth that we have, and take advantage of all these different players' superpowers.
So that's a clip that we played in yesterday's episode as well, just to kind of give you an idea of what it was that Kellen Moore said during his introductory press conference. But I wanted to dive deeper and give you some numbers that support what it is that Kellen Moore is talking about, right? Stressing the defense, utilizing tempo. Just how much did he utilize tempo with the Philadelphia Eagles, and how does that compare to the New Orleans Saints last year, who were chasing that offensive revival? Well, let's just say that the difference is dramatic. The two teams kind of did the same thing motion and shift-wise in 2024 in terms of increasing, getting towards the league average, especially with motion at the snap, i.e. motion that's happening when the ball is snapped to the quarterback, all that. But the difference here, really, the difference maker for me, is going to be that tempo part of the conversation. The Philadelphia Eagles were number 6 in the NFL in plays per drive. The New Orleans Saints ranked number 21. Now, the numbers don't feel like they're very different. 5.87 for New Orleans, 6.32 for the Philadelphia Eagles, but that stacks up. That's almost over 100 plays more for the Philadelphia Eagles. And of course, if you're finding efficiency on all of those plays, that ends up making each one of those plays more and more valuable. On an EPA standpoint, the Eagles blew the Saints out of the water as well. So if you're getting, points per drive, points per play, efficiency per attempt, then you're also getting, or on average, you're also getting those extra plays. They're bringing you more success. So there's that factor of it. But let's just strictly look at no huddle for a second. The Philadelphia Eagles went no huddle on 24.9% of their snaps last year. The New Orleans Saints, that was number 3 in the league, by the way. The New Orleans Saints ranked pretty still respectable at number 15 in the NFL, but they ran no huddle on just 9.8% of their offensive plays. Less than 10%. The Philadelphia Eagles, on the other hand, almost a quarter of their plays included no huddle, tempo, getting to the line of scrimmage. Why is that important? It's important because you're not letting the defense substitute. So you're tiring out the defense and you're wearing the defense down, especially when you're running no huddle and you have a good run game, right? You're literally beating them up and then making them get up. It's like taking somebody and punching them with their own fists and going, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. All right. I wasn't a bully as a kid. All right. I've just seen some movies. I want to be really clear about that. But that's the type of offense that Philadelphia put together, especially after their bye week, when they really started to lean into their run game, Saquon Barkley, but kept this no huddle and tempo portion of their offense up. We also saw the success that it brought to them in the Super Bowl. I referenced the play in yesterday's episode when we were breaking down more of the introductory press conference. We are a daily show here on Locked On Saints covering the team every day. So if you missed that episode, go on back. We got it for you. You can find it wherever you're finding this. And in the Super Bowl, there was a stretch of 6 no huddle plays, back to back to back to back 6 times. And so what you saw in the midst of all that was this interesting 1st and 10 4-yard run by Kenneth Gainwell, the backup running back for the Philadelphia Eagles last year, behind Saquon Barkley. And what you saw on that play was a center, a guard on either side, and then instead of the tackles being lined up where you typically see your tackles lined up on the offensive line, they were out wide, right? It's called a polecat. And then so you saw the quarterback and Kenneth Gainwell behind, or it's a version of a polecat. This isn't exactly a polecat, but it's a version of one. And so you snap the ball, hand the ball to Kenneth Gainwell, and he picks up a quick 4 yards. 4 yards doesn't look like a lot on paper, but think about the amount of 3rd and 7 pluses that the New Orleans Saints played last year. It was a lot. They were behind the sticks a considerable amount. You can factor in injuries and all that other stuff you want to, but part of the game plan was to win on 1st and 2nd down, and New Orleans did not consistently win on 1st and 2nd down. A 4-yard run is a win on 1st down, and it takes you from a 1st and 10 to a 2nd and 6, a much more manageable situation staring at you when you eventually get to that 3rd down, which the Eagles did end up converting. Now that that drive did not end in a touchdown for Philly by any means. I actually think that it ended in an interception, if I remember correctly. But the idea here is that you're beating up that defense. You're keeping them on the field, and you're not letting them get a new play call in or any type of major adjustments in. You're keeping them in the same look over and over and over again so that you're able to diagnose, okay, this is what they're doing, so we're going to do this to respond to that. So that's one of the reasons why tempo, no huddle, very important. And so with the efficiency of Philadelphia's playbook in offense in 2024, you can see how adding more tempo, maintaining the amount of motion, being more effective with the usage of that motion, and some of the things that we've broken down before in Kellen Moore's offense, which includes more of that attacking the middle of the field, all those pieces, you can see where the New Orleans Saints have the opportunity here starting in 2025. They probably won't get it all together in 2025, but starting in 2025, over the course of Kellen Moore's tenure, to finally get that offensive revival that New Orleans has so desperately been chasing since the departure of Drew Brees and Sean Payton. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints don't just need modern ideas on their offense, they need modern ideas on their defense. And that's what makes a defensive coordinator hire so much more important than any other hire that Kellen Moore will make this offseason. Let's break that down next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The NFL season might be over, but as the NBA season continues to roll along, MLB approaching as well, there's so much for you to still get in on over at FanDuel and make every moment even more exciting. All-Star Weekend on the way for the NBA. Damian Lillard is the favorite to win the three-point contest at plus 300. A pretty nice favorite to potentially bet on there, which is great for you if you're a new customer over at FanDuel, because right now new customers at FanDuel have a chance to win $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. All you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com today to get started. Put that $5 bet down on a heavy favorite, something like that. If it's your first $5 bet and you win, you've got your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Once again, that is FanDuel.com. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, the single most important coaching staff hire for Kellen Moore, New Orleans Saints' new head coach, is going to be the defensive coordinator. Kellen Moore is going to call the offensive side of the ball. He's got that all taken care of. But he's going to need that complementary defense that he wants in position as well. And it's one of the reasons why I think he should go with somebody whose defensive scheme he is familiar with. It's one of the reasons why former Los Angeles Chargers head coach Brandon Staley is near the top of the list and should be the hire for Kellen Moore, in my opinion. Now, a lot of people are going to maybe feel a little bit of a type of way about that because of how poorly things went for Brandon Staley as a head coach, but that is not at all representative of what he was like as a defensive coordinator. Now, he had a lot of help as a defensive coordinator in his 1 year with the Los Angeles Rams. There's no doubt about that. Defensive Player of the Year and Aaron Donald, an all-pro season from Jalen Ramsey, a 10-plus sack season from Leonard Floyd. But just because you can do good things with good talent doesn't mean that you should be diminished in terms of what it is that you could potentially bring to a team. The idea here is that you hire a coach and also go and get good talent. Now, the Saints have a lot of work to do over on the defensive side, but as we discussed on the offensive side, there's work to do there too. But bringing in some modern influence, some modern approaches, things like that over on the offensive side is important, and it might be even more important over on the defensive side. We saw that it moved the needle a bit for the New Orleans Saints last year, though inconsistently, but it still moved the needle for New Orleans. I think you can see the same thing over on the defensive side. And it's interesting that the two guys so far that have been linked to the New Orleans Saints when it comes to that defensive coordinator position, either by request to interview or by, strong rumor, connection, all those other things, is that both candidates so far, when it comes to Brandon Staley, as well as Durante Jones, the former LSU defensive coordinator, and also has been with the Minnesota Vikings over the course of the past couple of years, operating as like the defensive pass game coordinator, defensive backs coach loan before he added that defensive pass game coordinator title, is that both of those guys are pretty familiar with running 3-4 defenses as opposed to 4-3 defenses. Ross, what are you talking about? 4-3 defense, typically 4 down linemen, 2 defensive tackles, bookended by a pair of defensive ends, and then 3 linebackers. So 4 on the defensive line, 3 at your linebacker spot. So it's a 7-man front with 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers. That's 4-3. If you're doing 3 down linemen with 1 nose tackle, bookended by a pair of defensive ends that are maybe a little bit more focused on run stuffing than pass rushing, and then 4 linebackers, 2 on the inside that are considered more coverage guys, 2 on the outside that are considered more pass rushers. That is a 3-4 7-man front, 3 down linemen, 4 linebackers. So that's what you're looking at here is the latter when it comes to guys like Durante Jones as well as Brandon Staley. There's a couple reasons why I think this is important. And there's a couple reasons why I think that Brandon Staley, because of his familiarity with Kellen Moore and also his coaching tree, is a perfect match over on the defensive side. That 3-4 helps a ton. We'll break that down. But also, Brandon Staley's a Vic Fangio guy. Was with him, I believe, in Chicago, went with him over to Denver before he became the defensive coordinator over in Los Angeles. We just saw how successful Kellen Moore's offense was with Vic Fangio's defense. Brandon Staley ran a pretty successful version of a Vic Fangio-esque defense in Los Angeles. Now he could have an opportunity to bring something like that here to New Orleans as well. Let's go back to why the 3-4 modernization approach is something that would be positive for New Orleans. Well, first of all, one of the big things is that 3-4 does a really good job of defending what is the trend right now, which is that outside zone run game. Gets you already to a place where you are lined up outside the tackles. You have the opportunity with those 2 outside linebackers or outside linebackers / pass rushers, right? To be able to kind of set that edge, kind of force things back inside for your run stuffing 3 guys to be able to muck up the middle of the run game a little bit. Remember, every outside zone run has 2 inside options. It's got one where you can bang back up in the middle, another where you can bend back to the opposite side. And so what you want to be able to do is force that outside zone running back to not choose his initial lane and instead to cut back to a different part of the lane and everything like that. New Orleans did some of that last year, but the issue was that anytime that running back chose to bounce back inside, there was nobody there to tackle him. So when you're operating in this 3-4 sort of run front, you have the 3 guys that are dedicated to pushing your offensive line. And then you also have the other guys on the outside that are dedicated to challenging the edges, while your 2 inside linebackers, who are almost always considered coverage guys, but are almost always also run first guys, end up being able to provide some additional support either on the inside or on the outside based upon whatever their run fronts might be, or their run fits, might be. So it gives you a little bit more of the ability to take advantage of athleticism, but also the ability to take advantage of some big bodies in the middle of the defense. So I think that's one of the reasons why. Oh, and then you add on top of that the mobile quarterback, and all of a sudden you've got athletic guys on the edge that can kind of help to force those guys back inside as well. Does any team do a really good job at defending mobile quarterbacks? No, your best bet is to play fewer of them on a yearly basis. But there's not a lot of opportunity to do that in today's NFL. But if you want to be good at it, you have to have that athleticism. The other thing that I want to mention, and this guy's caught a lot of flack because he hasn't been able to get out on the field. He's a second-round draft pick, and he's mostly been a special teams contributor. But I believe that the 3-4 could, I'm not saying will, but could put Isaiah Foskey in position to avoid bust territory. Right now, he's getting a lot of those tags, he's getting a lot of that conversation. 2 years in the league so far as a second-round draft pick, hasn't really been able to see the field as a defender. And one of the reasons why might be because the role that he played at Notre Dame, which is typically referred to as the Viper role, it was in Marcus Freeman's defense when he was a defensive coordinator, and Isaiah Foskey had 11 sacks. Then Al Golden took over that defense when Marcus Freeman in 2020, mid-2021, going into 2022, took over as the head coach. Al Golden kept that going. I believe they actually have kept that going under Al Golden for up until now, where Al Golden is the Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator now. So we'll see what they'll do in 2025. But that Viper role, VYP, I think they do it VYPER, but maybe it's VYPHER. The reason why they had that, or what that is effectively a stand-up edge rusher over on the opposite side that can either drop back into coverage as a linebacker or rush the passer. And so it allowed Isaiah Foskey to go back-to-back on 11 sack seasons. My apologies, an 11 sack game. We'd be talking about a very different player at this point. But 11 sack seasons back-to-back because he was able to utilize the athleticism that he hasn't been able to utilize, putting his hands in the dirt and having to try to win around the edge while he is playing sort of a 5-tech as opposed to a wide 9. 5-tech meaning lined up inside the offensive tackle, as opposed to being on the outside, stand up, trying to win with speed, but also converting speed to power when he can actually get a running start. You're not getting a running start out of a 3-point stance the same way that Isaiah Foskey found so much success getting that running start and being able to manage that get off, being a 2-point stance, stand-up edge rusher. Could be something that really helps the Saints develop another defensive end that kind of helps you carry your future at the position along with Carl Granderson and anybody else that you invest in this offseason. So not only are you talking about a system that can come in and modernize and help you get to a point to where you can handle some of the things that some of these offenses are throwing at you these days, but it could allow you to be able to save the career of a young player that you invested very highly on. And I think both of those things, or at least if you're putting that player in that position, it generates buy-in, just like we talked about over on the offensive side. Do the things that your players are great at. A 3-4 defense might be able to do that. Coming up next, let's dive in next to the tight end coach hire that the New Orleans Saints had, and how it could potentially put the New Orleans Saints on an inside track to 2 potentially big-time free agents at the position. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. Yes, the football season is over, but basketball is rolling right along. College basketball, pro basketball, whatever it is that you're into, you're going to be able to find it over at Prize Picks. And it's super simple to play over at Prize Picks. You don't have to go up against a bunch of, invisible lineups. You don't have to manage a roster with injuries. You don't have to deal with stupid trade proposals and stuff like that. It's you and your football knowledge and football takes versus the house in exchange for potential at real, cold, hard cash. Here's how it works. 2 to 6 players. They'll give you projections on stats. Choose more or less. Jason Tatum, 29 points, more or less. Do that for 2 to 6 players. Get those right. You're going to 1,000 times your cash. Go and check them out today over at prizepicks.com, or you can download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup at Prize Picks. Run your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints and Kellen Moore have made another addition over on the offensive side of the football when it comes to their coaching staff. And it could be a potentially impactful one, putting them in some pretty good position for two potential free agents that could become available here in 2025 or next year in 2026. The New Orleans Saints, according to NFL Network's Mike Garafolo, have hired or are agreeing to terms with Chase Haslett. If the last name sounds familiar, it's because it should. It's Jim Haslett's son. Now, don't hold him accountable for that. But Jim Haslett, of course, the former New Orleans Saints head coach, and one of the reasons that a lot of people didn't like the idea of Dennis Allen being the head coach, because defensive head coach, all those other things. Well, now you're out from under the thumb of the defensive head coach conversation. And so now, with Chase Haslett, you've got a new tight end coach here in town. So that means that the Saints are moving on from Clancy Brown, or this would mean that the Saints are moving on from Clancy Brown, at least at that position. We'll see exactly what happens with him. But it does do a couple things for the New Orleans Saints. It aligns and reunites Kellen Moore with a guy that he's very familiar with in Chase Haslett. The two overlapped while Chase Haslett was a quality control coach with the Dallas Cowboys. They overlapped for 2020, 2021, and 2022 before Kellen Moore left to take that offensive coordinator position over with the Los Angeles Chargers. During that 2023 season, you saw Haslett bump up to assistant tight ends head coach. And then last year in 2024, he was the team's pass game coordinator. So we'll see if Haslett also gets the passing game coordinator tag along with, the offensive, along with the tight end coach tag there. And we'll see which way things go there. But this could be a pretty impactful hire for the New Orleans Saints in terms of positioning themselves for two quality tight end free agents should they become available this year or even looking ahead to next season. Those names, Dalton Schultz, as well as Jake Ferguson. Why? Because Dalton Schultz and Jake Ferguson both enjoyed their greatest successes working with Chase Haslett amongst all of the tight ends. So Dalton Schultz saw his still career highs of 78 catches, 808 receiving yards, and 8 touchdown receptions during the 2021 season, while Chase Haslett was the quality control coach working closely with the tight ends. You also saw Kellen Moore as a part of that offensive play calling side. You saw one more year for Schultz with the Cowboys after that, and then he went over to the Houston Texans. Right now, with the Houston Texans, he's got 1 year left on his contract, which is that 2026 season. And so we'll see, he's got a potential out coming up. And so does that mean that the team and he end up parting ways? An opportunity there for him to maybe reunite with two guys that got the most out of him in Chase Haslett as well as Kellen Moore. So we'll see where things go. This might not be a this year positioning for them. This might be a next offseason positioning for them. But as the Saints look to build their offense over, again, incremental improvements over the course of several years during the early Kellen Moore era, there's something to be said there. The other player that I would keep in mind here is going to be Jake Ferguson. Jake Ferguson saw his best season of his career back in 2023 when Haslett was his assistant tight ends coach, and again, working very closely with those tight ends. And Ferguson had 71 receptions, 761 receiving yards, as well as 5 touchdown catches during that time, enjoying the opportunity after that to be able to be a first-time Pro Bowler during that season at the position. Now, Ferguson is entering the final year of his rookie deal. The Dallas Cowboys are going through some big changes over on the offensive side. We'll see where things go. Now, Brian Schottenheimer's kind of been hired over there or promoted over there in order to maintain Mike McCarthy's kind of way of things. And so that could mean that Jake Ferguson's perfectly at home, the former Wisconsin Badger, with the Dallas Cowboys in 2025. But if not, opportunity there. Opportunity for the Saints to pick up the phone as well if they want to, since he's in the last year of his deal. And with him being in the last year of his deal, if things don't happen for Jake Ferguson and the Saints in 2025, he would certainly become an immediate name to pay attention to at the position in 2026. So beyond that, the idea of free agent acquisitions and things like that, the other thing that you have here is somebody that has proven to be a bit of a developer at the position. So if you invest in another young option, or if you decide to try to elevate Dallin Holker, last year's kind of not top, but a big named undrafted free agent that the Saints had last season, a guy that Clancy Brown called the 8th round pick for the New Orleans Saints. If you're able to get somebody like Chase Haslett, who by the way is just 32 years old, and can connect with these guys, kind of the similar approach to what you're seeing with Kellen Moore at head coach, being 36 years old and his ability to relate to the players and all that. There's some development potential to be had in some of the young guys. And then there's Foster Morrow, who is going to be an all-around big-time piece, I imagine, for the New Orleans Saints in 2025, just like he was in 2024. Not a guy you're looking at and going, oh, he needs more development. He's Gucci. He's fine. So I think you feel good there. But we don't know if Juwan Johnson's going to be back in 2025. His contract is expiring. He's set to hit the market. We'll see where things go. So the Saints could look to add to this room via free agency if guys like Jake Ferguson as well as Dalton Schultz end up becoming available, which again might not be likely this year, might be something more so to look ahead to next season. But if that were to happen, an opportunity to go after a free agent at the position. But also, this year's tight end class is fantastic. And you think about a guy like Dalton Schultz, and it's not hard to think about a guy like Mason Taylor from LSU as a potential fit for what it is that the New Orleans Saints would like to do at the position, and a potential fit and copy of what it is that Chase Haslett has been successful with in the past. Same thing for Jake Ferguson, 6'5", 244. Mason Taylor's a guy that's coming in at around 6'5", 250-ish pounds and everything. And so you can feel, and then has that all around blocking ability, both in the run game and in the passing game, but can also end up beyond being a protector. He can run routes for you. He's got secure hands, safe hands. He could be an option for you over the middle of the field, so on and so forth. And who better than to help him develop along with a guy like Chase Haslett than a guy like Foster Morrow, also an former LSU Tiger here in the building from the area, all those other things. So you can see sort of the symbiotic or synergistic, rather, not symbiotic, but synergistic fits and approaches and pieces, puzzle pieces coming together when it comes to some of these names and how they could potentially end up helping one another or leading the Saints to another option in the coming years in this year. I think it's important as we're watching the New Orleans Saints build out their rosters, build out their coaching staff and things like that, to be looking 2 or 3 years in advance as well, in terms of the talent that they're connected to, who could hit the market and all those other things. Maybe those guys don't hit the market here in 2025, but if they become available in 2026, you're still building at that point. No matter what, like the Saints can be a rousing success in 2025 and you're still looking to build in 2026. And so I think a young hire like this and a Chase Haslett, repairing him with Kellen Moore is a show that, hey, there's some forward thinking here. And it goes to show you too that there is actually that collaboration between Kellen Moore and the organization. It's not just the organization saying, here's your coaching staff, right? It's Kellen Moore being able to be reunited with guys that he's familiar with. Brendan Nugent, somebody that both the Saints and Kellen Moore are familiar with. Keith Williams, somebody that the Saints are familiar with, also one of the better wide receiver coaches in the NFL. And then Chase Elliott, somebody that Kellen Moore is familiar with, but hasn't had any exposure to the New Orleans Saints, or at least much exposure to the New Orleans Saints. And so you're seeing the collaboration at hand. We're going to see the coordinator hires start to creep up here over the last little bit, or over the next little bit. Defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator. We're assuming special teams coordinator as well. All 3 of those require a full process, Rooney Rule, satisfaction, all those other things. Position coaches, they don't require that, but I wouldn't expect any position coaches on defense hired until a defensive coordinator is in place. And if a defensive coach does get hired, I think it's an early clue as to who, or like a position coach does get hired, it's an early clue as to who the defensive coordinator may be. So we'll keep an eye out on that. We'll keep you up to date here every day, 7 days a week here on Locked On Saints, and at least once a day, right? We've been doing a couple multiple times a day. If you want more in between these episodes, I highly recommend checking out the Insider program. You can text HUDAT to 504-285-7473. Click the link in the description as well so you can join. More information, more chat, opportunity to ask questions, get my feedback, one-on-one conversation, all that good stuff, and film studies on the way as well. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.